This is Jen Bauer. I am here with Women Who Code Greenville, and I am here to present to you all a Postman Sightseeing tour. So I'm here to be your captain as we go through various features and things of Postman. So let's go ahead and get started here. All right. So we're here with Women Who Code. Let's see. A little bit about Women in Code. We empower diverse women to excel in technology careers, of course. We want to, of course, make sure that we help everyone diverse, everywhere, any type of background, whoever you are, we want to help you be successful. We've got lots of values, of course, advocating for change, inclusion, just making sure that we're supportive to everybody. We've got people all over the place who are a part of our membership, but of course our group is just here in South Carolina. And of course we're super inclusive, but we also don't tolerate y'all being nasty at all. So y'all are going to behave on my plane is all I'm saying. So y'all be good. And Carmen's here to be my my co-pilot. So y'all watch yourselves. Okay. So anyway, as Carmen introduced me, yes, I am actually a QA engineer at Hungry Root. So I'm delighted to share with you some of my testing tricks and things that I get into here. So let's go ahead and get going here. All right. So let's go ahead and let's see here. Just trying to change a little bit of what I've got. Hold on just a second here. Got this bar in my way. All right, so let's go to the sightseeing tour. Okay, so it's time for the sightseeing tour. Now, what we're going to do today, before you can get in the plane, you need to install Postman locally. You can use it in the browser. It's totally up to you, but I definitely recommend actually running it locally. It's a heck of a lot easier. Makes it a lot more fun. Just trust me on this. Okay. Now, are you seated? Put on your seatbelt. We've got a workspace. You can look it up as the www Code Greenville API Training Workspace. I've got a URL here. We also put it in the chat. I also put in a link to a public Google Drive where you can import a JSON file if you want to go ahead and play with it that way. I'll also show that you can fork this public space if you want to go ahead and mess around with these requests on your own. Or you can import that JSON file to your local workspace and then mess around and have a great time and have a sightseeing tour whenever you feel like it. How awesome is that? All right, now it's time. We're going to get on the plane. Let's get going. All right, so let's see here. Let's get all this out of the way. We got to get on to Postman. All right, so we're going to begin our sightseeing tour here. We're going to go through the pre-flight checklist. So some of the things that we want to talk about today, we're going to talk a little bit about some API terms. So I did say that this sightseeing tour was for folks who are maybe a little bit new to APIs, testing, all that sort of cool stuff. So if you're not jumping into the Postman app or you're totally overwhelmed, it's okay. Relax. I got you. So let's talk a little bit about some of these terms before we get into crazier and wilder things. So an API, application programming interface, it's essentially the way applications talk to each other, right? So it's just essentially an agreed upon way that they're going to talk to each other. If you ever hear people talk about REST or GraphQL, all these different types of architectures or ways that the software can talk to each other, these are just essentially different architectures. All the APIs we're going to talk about today are REST because I feel like it's just real easy and readable and human friendly. So again, we're here to relax, have a good time. But there's plenty more to learn about if you like this and it piques your curiosity. The other thing we're going to learn about are methods. So methods are all about the types of requests that can be sent back and forth. So there are a lot of different types. We're only really going to be looking at like 2 different ones that are extremely common, but there's a lot of other ones that are going around out and about. So let's get started. Let's start actually looking at some things. All right. So let's actually take a look at our request, shall we? And if you don't mind, I'm going to take off my sunglasses here and my extremely realistic headphones, and we're going to get going. So we have here a request because any tour guide worth their salt is going to tell you about something that's local. So this is actually a request that's to one of our local API projects at another group that we have called Hack Greenville. And they do lots of development projects to help our local students of development just have something to get their feet wet with. And they can have something that they're working on in a group repository setting. And they actually have this little project where they've got some map layers. So let's take a look at what's going on here. And actually, we'll start all the way over here. So what is going on here? What is all this? So let's start from the beginning. This little drop down right here, which says get. Get is our method. So that we're going to essentially use this URL to receive some information to get it. It's really just that simple. So what we have here is a URL. Now, I've gotten a little fancy here in advance. It's not always going to be that fancy, so don't worry about that. But this particular URL is going to be this open data URL, which is going to be, it's actually going to end up being an actual full URL that's going to go and go ahead and actually go make a request. So when we hit send, we're going to get some information back. This information is coming back in a particular language. So it could be in any number of languages, but this one happens to be called JSON. JSON is also super readable. It's essentially these key value pairs. So it's giving you some information and what the value for that particular piece of information is. So this little API is all about different types of layers on a map. And this particular, what we call an endpoint, is all about waterfalls. So it's all about waterfalls in Greenville, y'all. So like we're starting to plan our trip here. So we've already got some ideas of some waterfalls we could take a look at. We've got Arboretum Falls. It's got apparently a height of 10 feet. And from these coordinates over here, it's only about, about a tenth of a mile. So there you go. We've got some information here when we talk to this particular endpoint. So we've got some information that's coming back. This is called the response. So when you send a request, you get, hopefully, if all goes well, a response back. So this is what your response is that's coming back from this particular endpoint. So we want to say hello to this particular endpoint, and we're getting some information back. A GET request is all about getting that information back in particular. So this response body is really important for those types of requests. So some other things that we want to talk about. We're going to talk about these other areas of the request as well. So the status code is called a 200 OK. Oh, this is the, I don't know, this is the piece de resistance of APIs and API testing. We're always looking for this 200 OK. This is the gold star that we're looking for almost all the time, especially for our happy path testing when things are going well. This means success. And, you can just highlight all these different status codes to see what's going on. But this means things are going well. So we're able to make our requests, and the other system was able to talk back to us. And it had no other problems. There was no other confusion. There was no other upset or drama. So things are looking good so far. Other aspects of this particular request, and we'll have more examples of these other things later on, but Postman puts them all in a really nice UI here so that you can just poke around and see what's going on very easily. If you have parameters in your URL here, you could have them here. If there's authorization, which is your security and how you might be able to access that particular endpoint, perhaps you won't get anything back unless you have a username and a password, for example. It's a very simple form of authentication, but there are also very complex forms of authentication that also might be involved. Now, nothing in here has got any sort of authentication at all. I found all the most fun, open, public APIs you could possibly imagine. So everything is just a good time. You don't need to worry about that. But if you want to learn more, there are plenty of APIs out there that Postman has in the public area where you can explore and find more that do have some authentication and things that you can sign up for, like API keys. And then you can find some more fun things. So you do have those options there. Now, let's see. What else do we have here? If this were a different type of request, we might have some information that we were sending with it called the request body. Now, this particular request is called a GET. So we actually don't need to have anything in the body at all. But we're going to have some other requests that are a little bit more complicated coming up in the future here. But not today, not at the moment here. We're just planning, right? We're planning our trip. Now, Postman in particular has a really, I would say, very smart way that it divides some of the logic that you can use in sending these requests. Now, if I just want to send requests from here to high heaven just for funsies, I can absolutely do that with Postman. But Postman, one of its strengths is being a testing tool. So part of being a testing tool is being able to set up the things that happen before you send a request and the things that happen after. So there's what's called the pre-request script, which is what this area is, and then there's the test area or the post request. So the things that happen before and the things that happen after. So that's what these two areas are. Now there's a little bit going on here that we're going to get into in a moment, but that's just to let you know what these two different sides of the coin are. You can have things that happen before and things after. Now the pre-request area, just so you know, both sides of this coin are using JavaScript. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, this is a great way that you can apply some of that knowledge. I have previous years of JavaScript knowledge, so it's great that I can continue to apply that here. But if you don't, this is very much a very small way that you can apply it. Very small JavaScript IDE. And there are a lot of helpers in here that will help you if you haven't used JavaScript before. There are lots of examples and things. So I'm going to show you one of those examples here. In this URL right here, I have what's called a variable set here that Postman knows. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on here. In the world of Postman, if you have a variable, you set it by putting it in these two curly braces. So I have this open data URL, right? It's like, okay, you've set a variable. You have a variable placeholder here. Now, what are you going to fill it with? What's the value going to be? And this is essentially one of those very simple statements that you can use to set the value of that variable right here, which is this variables.set. And I'm just setting that part of the URL as a simple example, just so that you can have a very simple example of how to do that. It absolutely can be more complex than that, but we're just going to start with simple. So let's go to the other side, the test. This is usually where things get a little bit more wild. So talking about things that are a little bit crazier here, things that can get a little bit hairier. You've got waterfalls, we've got logic here, all sorts of things that we can take a look at. So we're going to get more into this logic later, but let's get going. All right, we've got our pre-flight checklist. We went through some terms. Let's get moving. We're going to take a look at some more trip planning. So the next API I want to take a look at is what's called Skyscanner. It has some information about local airports. So I'm going to go ahead and send this request, and now we have a post. We're going to send this little bit of JSON, and this is a latitude and longitude that's somewhere around me. I'm over in Greer, South Carolina, so this is somewhere in my neck of the woods, and we're going to see if it finds, based on that latitude and longitude, some information about my area. So let's see if it can figure out. Aha, it figured out that my local airport is GSP. So we're in the right neighborhood. So far, so good. So let's take a look using one of these other endpoints that this API has. And it has a way that you can essentially send a request to find out information about flights from GSP to another airport, or from airport to airport. So I'm going to do GSP to Charleston and see what sort of information it finds. Let's see. Too many requests. Oh no, I've only sent one request. Are you sure? Let's see. Okay. All right, it's a little happier about that. So GSP to Charleston, I did get a session token here, and then it's got some other details here. Now there's a lot going on in this body. So let's go ahead and go over to the test, and we'll see that we get a session token, and there's lots of other details here. All right. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on, so many other details. So really, this request was only about just getting that session token. You'll find there are a lot of APIs where you do need that token to just do follow-up requests. So we're going to go ahead and take that. And by the way, this is saying, it's not saying variables anymore, guys. Oh no, it's saying something else. Oh goodness. I think we're going to have to talk about another concept here. So in the world of Postman, you actually have different types of variables. So I was just throwing out variables before just to get you all warmed up, but there's actually a couple of different types of variables. You essentially have variables at different levels or different scopes. So you can have a variable that's really just within the scope of a request, or you could have a variable that you could reuse across requests or across collections even. So because you can you can have these things at different levels of reusability, you have a way that you can set them in different places. So for example, this session token right here, I've actually set this at the environment level. If you're like, what's an environment? It's actually up here in this dropdown, and we have an environment that was made just for the Postman Sightseeing tour. So this session token that we just have here in this response body, we went and grabbed it, and I said, give me that, and I yoinked it, and I set it to this session token value over here. And I say, give me that, I want to use that again. And I did that very simply. Honestly, it's just 2 lines of JavaScript right here. So we're rocking and rolling. We just went and said, hey, from that response, I want to parse this little bit of JSON, please. And then take that little bit that we parsed and go set it to this environment variable. And then now, because it's hanging out up here in the environment, if I want to select a totally different request and use it again, I've got it. So this is one of those like secret awesome sauce weapons that you can use, especially if you're really new to using variables. It's very helpful because it's super exposed and you can just see it and know exactly what value it is and what's going on. And if you want to change it here, you could, like I could change it to Jen right now or whatever else I want it to be. And I know exactly what's going on. So if you just want to be really in the weeds here, you can totally do that. Let's do our follow-up request. Let's see what's happening. Oh, damn, I do requests. I'm too fast. Oh no. Well, it wasn't too fast the other day. So let me see if I'll just give it a moment here. There we go. Okay. So now what this does is it's like, okay, now that you're curious to retrieve these flights, and I want to do this in particular for these flight times with that session token, right? So I got this session token asking about GSP to Charleston, and I take it to this other endpoint that's polling using that session token, and then I get all this other data. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on. You guys, this is like so much JSON. Like, how am I ever going to get through this? So if you're totally new to Postman, this is going to be pretty wild. If you're kind of really experienced with Postman, this is probably also going to be wild. It's been pretty wild for me. Let me show you an experimental feature. So this is something brand new that has been trialed. If you're new to like the world of AI and things like that, you can ask what is called Postbot to take a look here and help you write your test assertions. So let's say you want to get something parsed out of here. Like, oh my gosh, I don't want to write all that JavaScript just to get out certain values. I could say, parse the arrival date time and departure date time for each result in the response body. And let's see how Postbot does with that question. Okay, so it's actually written out some JavaScript here. So we can go ahead and we can hit send. And then we can see what that test result looks like. Now, this is a little wonky, to be fair. Not quite exactly what I asked for. And we could take a look at the console and see, okay, like, did you parse out exactly what I want? It's kind of looking at the right level, not quite this round. So sometimes you'll get exactly what you want, sometimes you won't. Now, I have another time that I've asked it for this information, and it was pretty on the ball. So I'm going to show you what that looked like. And this was a little bit better because it actually was able to give me an arrival date and arrival time here. And actually, I'm kind of surprised it's not printing it this particular time. But it was able to give it to me another time here. So I'll have to see why the response is a little bit different. We'd have to then go troubleshoot, which is pretty normal when you're working with different APIs here. But it just depends on what you've got coming back here. But yeah, essentially there was some difference. Oh, that's curious. Let me send it one more time because I'm really curious why it's not giving me the date times that I had before. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why it's not quite the same this time, but before it was showing me, I was able to parse out the arrival date and the departure date. But it's a little different format this time. So I'll have to see how it changed between then and now. But anyway, you can essentially adjust this to change it up, and we'll have other results that we can see how these sorts of things can change. And you can continue to ask Postbot to say, this wasn't quite right. I want, something a little different, and it can keep kind of revising as you go. But we've got other things to do, so we got to get out of here. We got more things to check. So we're doing our trip planning. Now let's, before anyone goes on any sort of a long trip, of course you want to set a home alarm. So I want to show you another feature. It's called setting a monitor in Postman. So let's say that there's something that we want to take a look at, and we actually want it to keep, rechecking a particular endpoint over time, or maybe you have a series of requests that you want to run in a row and have it verify over time. So that's your sites over here, of course, local to me, the Women Who Code Greenville site, which is just coming back as a 200 OK. And actually, I'm just using the site URL itself, not a particular endpoint. And the same for the Hack Greenville site. Again, you can just use it almost like a site monitor and just check that it's up. And then the two tests that I have running it on right now are just status code 200, and the response time is less than 200 milliseconds, just making sure all that's good. So making sure that these things are coming up okay. So I have made a monitor based on that particular collection. So a collection is a group of requests and folders that have requests. So you can make this monitor and run it on a schedule. So let's take a look at the setup for this. This is my Greenville Sites monitor. You tell it which particular collection you want it to run and what your schedule is. And there you go. So I actually don't have it running from this folder. I put those two particular requests in their own collection here because I just wanted to run those two requests. And you'll see that actually this, unfortunately, the site sometimes is a little slow to come back up. So it's not always doing that less than 200 milliseconds runtime. Not always happening, but sometimes it is. So you get a nice mix of, responses here. But let me show you something else just so that you've got this in your back pocket. Did you know that you can also set this up as a Slack integration? So let's go over to Postman notifications here. And, sorry, Carmen. But you can actually set this up to have your Postman results come over here. And you can tell it whether or not you want it to always post results over here, or whether or not you want it to just only post when there's a fail. And you can have it maybe post 3 fails, and then only post again after there's been a success, etc. So you can have those sorts of details here, depending on what you want to monitor. So you can have that as something in your back pocket, especially if you're developing something and you are testing it, but it's kind of misbehaving in different scenarios. You're not really sure what's going on. You could even randomize some data and just have it running periodically and see if you can catch it and find some of that information. And when it does a run, you can essentially go back and take a look at that particular result to see what it was, and it will load it right back up. So there you have it. There's a tip and trick for you. So, all right, we're going to get on the plane and we're going to see some sights. So let's finally take a look at some travel items now that we've actually prepared our trip. So there is this API, it's called Teleport Urban Photos. So let's actually get traveling, you guys. Oh my gosh, it's time to get going. So this will actually show different photos for different urban areas. So if you ever see a URL for like an image or a link, you can just control click and it can just open up a brand new request. And then you can just see that request right there. Look at that, some beautiful San Francisco times here. We can go ahead and take a look at maybe Tokyo. Yeah, I want to go Tokyo. Absolutely, thank you so much. Now, let's say there are actually a lot of cities that I want to travel to. For some reason, like we're going to go everywhere, guys. I don't know where you want to go, but let's do it all. Let's go to all the places. So what I'd like to share with you is something called an iteration data file. So this is the way that I like to set up a little bit of logic for an iteration data file. There's a couple of different ways that you can do it. It's up to you. You don't necessarily have to set it as a global. You can do it as like a collection level variable, but I just want to give you yet another example of a different variable type. We were talking about an environment level variable before, which hangs out in the environment. But let's say you want to go one level higher. You could do what's called a global. A global is even higher than an environment. So it's even like, it doesn't even care what I change in the drop down. Who cares what environment I'm doing, man? This global's forever. So this is the highest level that essentially you can do. If there is something that you just want to always have available within your workspace, you can think of it as like at the workspace level. So we'll just say we're trying that out just to see what that looks like. But anyway, that's just a sidebar there, just so you have another example of one of those in flight, as it were. But let's take a look at this iteration data. So I'm going to say from this particular value, this get city list, listen, if I've got a value, I want to go grab this city list value, and I want to substitute it in for city locally. Wherever I see this city, please put this value in. But if I don't find it, can you just put in Tokyo? Like, can I just go to Tokyo if I can't figure out anything else? Can we do that? Right? Can we see if that'll work instead? So that is some logic you can do just to make sure that you don't fail. It just depends on what you want to do, but maybe you do want to fail. I don't know. It depends on what's going on, right? So you could essentially just comment out all these other things so that you do fail on purpose. It's up to you what logic you do or you don't want to have, but you have all those things available to you. Now, how do we actually use iteration data, right? It's a great question. So I have a CSV file, but I'm going to show you what it looks like in text form. It's city list, and then I've got a bunch of city names here. Asheville and Greenville. You know, I've just got some over here on the East Coast on this list, and they're going to be substituted in for that city variable. We're going to see how many of those even work. Let's find out. So how do we even use that little list there, that little CSV? Let's find out. So we're going to do this feature called run collection. Oh, run collection has helped me so much over the years here. So we're going to deselect, because by default, it's going to select absolutely everything in the Postman Sightseeing tour. We don't need that. Absolutely not for this particular use. But we're just going to do this one for the multiple cities. That's where we have that little variable set up. And then for data, we're going to do select file. And all we want to do is the cities file. That's it. Now remember, we only had about 8 cities in there. Yep, so that's how we know that this is using that file correctly. It's referencing it right. So we're going to go ahead and run this session. Go ahead. Now it's going to loop through all those different files, and we're going to see which cities it has and which ones it doesn't. All right, so it's got Atlanta, it's got Miami, no dice on Savannah, no dice on Greenville. Oh man, Greenville. That stabbed my heart. Oh my goodness. We did have some Asheville, some Charleston, Charlotte. Okay. So we actually had 5 of those cities, and then we failed on 3 of them. So that's a little bit sad there, but you have an idea of, you know, which ones were successful and which ones were not. And there you have it, though. There's an example of just using an iteration data file, and you've got some logic right there that you can substitute in the future. Okay, let's keep moving here. So let's talk about some fellow passengers. So this is a really quirky GET request. This is randomuser.me/API. So let's say these are our other passengers on the flight with us. So let's find out who some of these folks might be. So we're not even sending it a body. And we're going to get back Mrs. Emma Fortin of Dundas Road of Sutton has joined us on the flight. So what I did was I did add in a little bit of logic here in the assertions, because I wanted to get that name parsed out of the response body. So this is a great example, like I was trying to show you earlier, that you can get that kind of information as test assertions. That can be really great depending on what you want to verify. So I wanted to get a person out of here. So if I go ahead and send this again, I've got Francisca Garcia or Renee Archuleta or Tyler Ramirez or Simonovic. I'm probably mispronouncing that, so apologies there. Anyway, I can get all sorts of these fun people. So there's a lot of really great ways that you can get that sort of information pulled out of a response body there, which is excellent. But let's say that we wanted to run this a lot of times. So we could go ahead and get like a whole list of people. So let's go ahead and we're going to do that good old collection runner again. So we're going to actually close all of our tabs so far. Yes, close them all. Close them all. And actually, yeah, we don't need to save the images. Yeah, don't save those. Okay, we're going to run a collection. And then we're going to do just the passengers. All right, and then we'll say maybe we've got 20 passengers. Sounds good to me. All right, let's go for it. Excellent. And here you go. You've got your 20 names here. Hilda and Mason and Antonia have joined us today. So there you are. Fantastic. Everybody's here. Wonderful. So that's one option that you can do with the options that we have here for doing the collection runner. Another thing that we can do with the collection runner, let's go ahead and do run collection. Let me show you an experimental feature, if I may. So we have this thing called performance testing. I don't know if we're going to do this for all that long. Oh, goodness gracious, because I'm streaming here, so I don't want to upset the apple cart or anything like that. Let's see if it'll even let me do it. It's like, don't do it for too little. I don't know. Okay. So let's say that we wanted to continue hitting this API over and over and over again. We wanted to see how well it performs, whether or not it slows down or not. So we could do that. So if I go ahead and I do that particular, I'm asking it to do so little. I don't want to upset it. I don't want to make it mad. It is a free API, so I'm wondering if it'll even rate limit me. We'll find out. Let's see. There's like nothing happening. Oh, there we go. So if you are more experienced with API testing, you might have used an application like JMeter or Locust or something like that. And there's some other ways that you can get API performance data. So this is Postman's first foray into trying to be a performance testing application. It's not typically something I've ever used it for, but this will give you some of that info here. I'm going to stop it. It's okay, Postman. It's all right. But here's some of your average response times, whether or not you were going to start getting errors. We're just doing little GET requests, so we're not asking it a whole lot, but you could have a very complicated flow that you were asking it like over and over, for example. So you could be a lot more wild than this if you wanted to. But that's right here in Postman. If you don't have that in your free account, I think this is like a beta feature that you can request if it's not rolled out for everybody yet. I try to ask for those whenever they come up just to see what's going on. But there you have it. All right, we've got all of our fellow passengers. So any tour guide worth their salt is going to try to throw at you some tour guide trivia. So let's go ahead and use the Open Trivia database and do some of just that. So OpenTDB.com is an API endpoint that will let you get trivia in all sorts of different categories. So here we go. Let's see, which one of these countries is not part of the Asian continent? Oh my goodness. I feel like this is maybe not quite that difficult here. Georgia, Russia, Singapore, or Suriname. Okay. Okay. I don't. Oh, these are all the answers together. Okay. So you need to display this a little better. This is not quite as gamified as I would like here. But this is, if we were to play a game of trivia, we would have plenty of content here. But I do want to show you that you can use in Postman something called a dynamic variable. And what's so cool about this is it gives you a way that you could randomize some information very quickly. So I'm going to use one of my favorite ones, which is the random integer. It's a random value between 0 and 1,000. Now, I know I can get away with it in the amount field. I don't know if I can get away from it in the category. So we're going to try it. And if it doesn't work, I will just go ahead and force the category we were in before, which is 22. And then, all right, there we go. And if you want to see what we sent when you're using all sorts of like variables and maybe randomization, you're just curious what exactly we even sent in the first place, you can go over here to this little code bracket and it'll show you the curl or the C URL for your particular request. So this actually randomized to 306. And there you have it. And that's how many, I'm sure we have like 605. Oh my gosh. We asked for a lot. I think it does limit for this particular API because it is a free one. It does limit at some point. So there you are. All right. So let's see. Oh yeah, and parameters. Of course, I got to talk about parameters. It's like, what are you even doing over here, Jen? Like, what is going on? Why is there a table all of a sudden? We were looking at JSON. What's going on? So why is this URL so long all of a sudden? You can have what are called URL parameters. And this is a great example of having that instead of having a body for your request or having a different format for your URL. But you can chain these together by having them up here. But Postman's like, listen, I know you don't want to edit a text block, right? That's rough. So let's put this in a table so that you can edit it. And maybe you want to just deselect or select what you want to do. So maybe you only want to select certain things. This particular API, I think, does cache a little bit. So like if you unselect some things, it just uses whatever you last sent. But another APIs, it does not. So it's really great to just have all those options there and you can just check and uncheck and quickly move about things. So this is just an example of using those parameters. All right, on to the next thing. Listen, we're API testing. We're on a sightseeing tour. Who said we have to go to real places? Let's go to a travel anime, you guys. Let's get out of here. Let's go somewhere else fun. So I'm going to open up here what's called the Gcon API, which is an anime-based API for looking up different anime series. And we can look at things up based on, you can do like a genre search, you can do a text search. There's like all sorts of ways that you can search things. So let's go ahead and find ourselves, based on these two parameters, a travel anime. Let's see what we can find. All right, so we've got, based on this, I'm going to parse out here a title. So let's see, the first one is called Tavi. Cool. And then what do we have here? We're going to set an anime picture ID with this little ID here. So let's go ahead and use that ID and see if we get an image. Oh, sweet. Okay, looks like we've got an image here. Let's see if we can take a look and see if this is any good. Does this give me the spirit of travel? Oh yeah, the trip. Excellent. Okay, well, now we've traveled at least to an imaginary place as well, which is fantastic. So we've got a lot of options here. Oh, and that's right. That was the one other thing I wanted to point out here is that I have a collection variable. So this little variable that I was sharing between these two requests actually set at the collection level. So this August 2023 session is a collection that has all these folders that we're going to travel through today. But this little anime picture ID, I actually saved up here. You guys can find it up here. So it's another place that you could save it. Say if there's something that you want to share across like a particular collection of requests, you have a way to do that here. And that's called a collection variable. All right, let's continue traveling. Okay, so we have an in-flight weather announcement. So let's take a look at our weather. So I'm going to again put in a lat long for not too far from me over here in Greer. And we're going to see what sorts of information we get. I'm just doing some quick assertions for the response status code being 200, our response time, things are looking good. And then I was going to try to, parse out some forecast values because this body has all kinds of things depending on whether or not it actually has a forecast for you. You can actually get hourly and observation stations. There's all kinds of URLs you can get from weather.gov. So I actually went and pulled out, I think, the hourly one. So we're going to use that URL here. And we're going to go ahead and get even more information. So let's see what we've got. I'm going to go ahead and move this to test results. So one thing I love to do in particular, if you've got a lot of different results, is go ahead and make sure that you loop through them and get all those different results. which is definitely a tip that you can use in your test to make sure that you get all of those different possible results. So you've got for each loops and all sorts of things that you have in just regular old JavaScript. They're all available to you here. You also have example snippets here on the side, which it's hard for me to show you here. So let me just move some things around. All right. Excellent. So we have, of course, some little snippets here that you can always reuse. Like getting the response time is less than 200. You can just pop that in anytime and it'll go ahead and add that for you. So if I resent this, it'll just add that right at the top. But it's got other little bits as well. So you've got lots of assertion things that you can reuse, but just a lot of other things that you can do that might be helpful to you. Oh, okay. I can't wait to show you guys this. Here's another experimental feature if you are less of a new Postman person, but if you are new, like, let's just add it to all the cool things that you can do here. So let's say we're on our flight and it's time for some drinkies. So whether you prefer alcoholic or non-alcoholic, don't worry, I've got you covered. Let me show you this new feature called a Postman flow. So I've got two queries here. I'm going to do just one little get request for alcoholic drinks and another one here for non-alcoholic drinks. Okay, so we've got two different types of drinks here. Great. Now let's go to Postman flows. We're going to do our in-flight beverage service. Now you're like, what is this? What's going on? Like, what? There's a grid in Postman. Like, what is happening? This is a new feature to give you a way that you can think about your requests in the way that you move between them, in the way that you connect the logic between them, and essentially creating a way that you can run things in parallel. So it's pretty cool. It just depends on the complexity of the things that you want to do. So I'm going to see actually if I can take this and can I just zoom out just a touch. So I'm going to show you a little bit by bit, and then I'll show you the whole thing. I'm going to run at the same time a request for alcoholic drinks and a request for non-alcoholic drinks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to see on the alcoholic side, can I find these two drinks, an Arctic mouthwash or a grasshopper? Oh, some weird ones. And I'm going to see if one or the two exist. And then on the non-alcoholic drinks, I'm going to look for a Shirley Temple, Roy Rogers, or a Thai iced tea and see if any of those exist. Let's find out. Okay? If they exist, if we can find any of them, we're going to pull out that image and see if we can have Postman serve it to us like a flight attendant. Okay? Let's see if we can do it. All right. Here we go. Let's see if we can have it happen. Awesome. Okay, so that's definitely not a grasshopper. So it looks like we are on our flight serving Arctic mouthwashes, and then that definitely looks like a Thai iced tea. So that is what we have available on our flight today. If things are not going well, you can add in these console logs so that you can take a look and, you know, further troubleshoot and things like that. But if you wanted to, you know, break this down, or if you wanted to have other images, you can absolutely just add more blocks. So it's just a different way that you can work through that logic and think about the types of requests you're doing. And if you want to do images or other fun things or ways that you connect that output information or use that output information, you've just got a lot of options. But I just thought this would be a great way to do some in-flight service for you guys on our sightseeing tour. All right, so one other thing that I wanted to show you guys, it's a feature actually that I don't get to use enough myself. It's called the mock API. So I was looking for a free API that was focused on beaches. Where is our beach API? I just want an API and all it's about, just focus on, here, let me just close all these guys real quick. Let me just, you don't need to see if anybody, okay. Where is the beach focused API of my dreams? Where is it? Haven't been able to find it. So I decided to make one. Now, developing a whole API is something you can do in Postman, and not something I'm doing tonight as part of the sightseeing tour. But here you are, here's where it is. If you wanted to create and develop an API that is possible to do within Postman. and they would love for you to stay in their ecosystem. But let's say we don't want to go quite that far yet. Maybe we're just setting up some tests for an existing API that we can't quite connect to yet, for example. So maybe we just want a couple of example requests that we could interact with, something like that. This is where a mock server is really helpful. So I made a Beachy API. So all it has is just a couple of these requests for just a couple of things that we can do. So let's see if we can take a look at this little collection here. And really all it is just you making a couple of examples, and it uses those examples, and you can just make a request pointed at those examples as if it were an API. So I've got essentially a beach number 1, a beach number 2, a beach number 3, a beach number, let's see, no, it's only 3 beaches. And then I have just a random beachy one that is a 404. So I've got a couple of different options here. So let's take a look and see how beach number 1 is doing. So if you look at this URL, you're like, whoa, what is that? Like, it's some crazy Postman URL. Absolutely right. And it's a public one too, but it's actually for Myrtle Beach. And I had a little additional note there, which is absolutely super cool. And I could absolutely change this URL and change it to Kiawah Island. Oh yeah, one code is absolutely super cool. Totally agree. Maybe I'll change it to number 3. Oh yeah, tour is totally awesome. I totally agree. And there's Hilton Head Island. Okay. What if I change it to something that doesn't know what to do with? Interesting. Well, it's still just kind of caching to the 200, but let's go ahead and change it to something else that we kind of told it what to do. We told it that we wanted it to fail on purpose. Then we get a 404 and we say, okay, well, I made an error code for it. So it's one of those things where it doesn't really have enough logic to really behave like an API. So it doesn't really fail like an API, for example. Like it really only is very direct to exactly what you give it. So if you want it to fail, you have to give it exactly how you want it to fail. And if you want it to succeed, you have to give it exactly how you want it to succeed. But what it's based on is actually this little, there's a collection just a little lower down here that has this Beachy API. And then what we have are these examples, and that's literally it. So I could just change it and save it. And then if I sent another request, it would update to that example. So you make as many examples as you want, and then that mock API server will go ahead and update to that. So just another tool in your tool belt so that you have something that you can use if you ever do need it for your testing or developing purposes, whatever that might be. So I hope that you guys have had a great time on this tour. I hope that you've learned a couple of things, that we've covered some things that are interesting and helpful for you. There's one last place that I want to take you to, a place that's near and dear to my heart, of course. And where would we be without some documentation? Are you kidding me? I couldn't possibly wrap this up without some docs. So there's no requests in here. Of course there's no requests in here. We're talking about docs. So we're going to go up here to the collection level. And we're going to say, hey, what's going on here? Do we have any documentation at this level? We've got some comments. So you can do comments essentially at each collection level here. And then at each folder level, you also can write some descriptive information. You also have some comments. At each request level, you also have some documentation. So there's some interesting possibilities, right? You've got a lot of these places where you can insert some of this different information, this different context that could be very helpful. So what do we have here? Do we have something that could potentially roll up into some really good information? So let's see. Let's see if we have. Oh, what's this? View documentation? You don't say. So if you do view documentation on a collection, what it will do is it'll essentially summarize everything in that collection. So whatever you have given it at all of those different levels will show up here. So you have a nice summary here. Now, I don't have this collection published yet. So at some point in the future, I probably will. And that will also give me, I'll show you here what the marketing for Postman is telling me it will be, how wonderful it will be and how beautiful it will be. But essentially it's telling me it'll look like any sort of like a JSON schema spec and have those beautiful, examples and things like that. Here's a live preview. So let's see how gorgeous this will look. Oh yeah, this is fantastic. I'll even have a nav bar. Oh man, I could just swoon. Fantastic. So for a lot of these also, I haven't typed up a heck of a lot. I did want to just make sure that I had, at least some details about where the URLs are coming from and, links to the documentation and things like that. But you could, of course, type in so much more context for your users and things like that. So you always want to have that available if you can. So there you have it. You have taken a Postman sightseeing tour with me. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and we are going to go back to our slides here. So I hope you enjoyed the tour. The topics we covered today: API and testing terms, variables, environments and assertions, requests, collections, monitors, flows, collection runner, mock API. Oh my, just so many different terms and things like that. So I hope that there was just a lot of good things for you here. I hope that even if you're, pretty experienced in Postman, hopefully we touched on something or other that you don't typically use. And I hope it was helpful. So if you are interested in learning more, there are a lot of places where you can go to find out just so much, depending on which direction you want to go in. If you're still very new to APIs, I highly recommend the Postman Learning Center. Just lots of good information about both just like the app itself, but also just like API terms and things like that. There's also a really great learning API that's called RESTful Booker that you can just use to test with, set up your test suite with. It's just really fantastic for, just using to play around with. And it's made for other QAs. So it's really got that in mind. It's quite lovely. Also, Postman themselves, they also have this great area where you can explore all the different public APIs. So this, of course, will get into authentication and setting up developer accounts, things like that. But the world really becomes your oyster once you don't mind setting up a free account or two. There's just so many things that you can check out, collections. Companies love sharing out their APIs and their documentation because they love for people to use them. So you've got a lot of things that are up here and it changes all the time. There are also free online classes and articles. Free Code Camp and Test Automation University are great examples of some free resources. And if you're just looking for like more communities for learning, of course, Women Who Code, you're already here. Congratulations, you found us. We're really great at sharing what we know and helping to connect you up with other resources if you need it. Ministry of Testing is great if you're just interested in quality assurance and doing QA work and learning about testing and best practices. And so is Agile Testing Days. Actually, they do just a lot of great, really wonderful conferences and talks and things like that, all about QA. So thanks so much for coming on the tour with me, coming on the flight. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also in the Women Who Code Greenville Slack. I'm on Blue Sky. You can email me. I've got a website. You can just honestly Google me, Jen Bauer, and you can find me pretty much anywhere. So thanks so much for coming.
That was so interesting. Thank you so much, Jen. I honestly did not know that you could do that with the documentation and Postman. So that was really cool and just a creative, fun sightseeing tour. Anyone, if you have questions for Jen, leave them in the chat and I can I'll see them there if you can leave them in the chat. Does anyone have any specific questions that they want to ask Jen?
I've left everyone speechless.
I mean, yeah, I honestly have a question. So if
Sure.
I already have an API, like let's say I'm building something out, does it
Yes.
matter what technologies I use to build my API? If I'm gonna try to test it and then spin up the documentation in Postman, does it have like a preference or um
No, and you know what? Honestly, you don't need to use Postman for spinning up the documentation. It's honestly whatever is easier for you. I think a lot of part of what the Postman approaches, I guess, or the Postman ecosystem, if you will, the Postman lifestyle. If you want to think of it like the Apple ecosystem, where they try to bring you in with everything working together so well and interconnectedly, I feel like
mhm,
Postman has like a very similar approach where it's like, oh, you're already testing in here. Come on, you
mm,
can make some docs in here while you're in here, and you know what?
yeah.
If you want to make another API, you're already here. Come on in, like don't worry about it. So it's all really honestly about just like that convenience and the interconnectedness of like you already have some work here. You can just update things as you're going because it's all you're essentially building on that foundation of the work that you already have. So it's
Okay.
really about what works for you. It may not necessarily be the best for your project to actually have the documentation in Postman, but let's say it's the difference between your team making documentation at all versus none. I think I would vote for Postman to just get some folks
Yeah.
in there with me, right? So it might just be great for like a first draft. And then maybe you decide that you actually want to do it in, you know, a different format, or like, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can document APIs. So it
Mhm.
might just be where you go for a first draft. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be your endpoint. I just say give it a go and see if it's what works for you.